Last week, we got a teaser trailer regarding a new map coming to Hell Let Loose, and that being Tobruk in 1942. A map that a lot of players and just people in general have been wanting from the game for a long time. And it's finally coming to Hell Let Loose next year. And overall, it looks like Team 17 have come a long way since that disastrous Update 13 or 14 trailer with the Breakcore Manor objective. And overall, the trailer slash teaser looks very clean and very good. And I thought, I want to break down what this map is for what we know and what its contexts are, like from a historical standpoint, and what the battle actually is, and break down what other maps they should bring to the game. And I'm going to try and throw a lot of different ones out there with a little bit of historical contexts with them. And I implore you guys, please leave your comments down below. What maps do you want to see that maybe I didn't list, or did I get something wrong, or anything like that? I encourage that in the comment section, please. But let's get into the video now. So before we get into talking about other maps, let's talk about Tobruk a little bit. So this will be the 1942 iteration of the battle, since there were two battles of Tobruk, one in 1941 and in 1942. The one in 1941 was essentially a several-month siege where the Germans and Italians fought against a couple Australian divisions, along with several little elements of other divisions from the British Commonwealth forces. The second battle, however, was a lot more favorable to the Axis, as the 19,000-strong South African division stationed at Tobruk during the 8th Army's retreat from the Gazala line managed to only defend for about a day against the German and Italian Panzer Army Africa, where the Germans finally got a closer port to the front lines in Tobruk, which would eventually help them continue their advance into Egypt, which, for anyone who knows history, would go on to lead into the battles of El Alamein later that year. Now, we're going to stick with the British theme here for a little bit, and just a disclaimer up front, I'm going to be throwing up a bunch of different videos, game footages from other games, and just anything I could use as game footage to kind of outline the battle that I'm talking about as best as I can. But obviously I can't do that to every extent, just bear with me. But the next map I'd add for the British would be a Normandy theme map. And I thought about this in two different ways. Either a D-Day map, like on the beach itself, or in the city of Caen, that the British tried very hard to take after the invasion of Normandy. Through lots of films and games and just everything, there's always this depiction that it's always the Americans at the beaches, when this is completely not the case. When the British and Commonwealth forces took 3 of the 5 beaches, technically 6 if you don't count the Pointe du Hoc operation, but for the sake of this, we'll just say the 5 beaches. And the British assaulted 2 beaches, and the Canadians assaulted a third, while the Americans assaulted the other 2. And it's just one of those things that it'd be nice to have that, especially since we actually already have a fan-made tack map of Juno Beach now that I'm throwing on screen. Kind of not fully polished out, but it gives an idea what the map could be. And it just goes to have more representation of the Commonwealth forces as a whole, especially on an operation that in films like Saving Private Ryan, Band of Brothers, Hell Let Loose itself, it gives a little bit more representation, and it can allow for maybe a different part of the beaches to be shown, and just more operations for the British in general. Now, let's keep with the British, but let's move the battlefield area a little south, shall we say. Moving on with the Battle of Ortona. Now, this was a battle between the Canadian 1st Infantry Division and the German 1st Fallschirmjäger, or Parachute Division, taking place near a coastal town on the east side of Italy as the British troops advanced through the eastern side of the country, with the Americans attacking the western part of Italy. Ortona was a 8-day battle that saw fierce fighting both in and around the city of Ortona itself, with the area around it being heavily defended by the Fallschirmjägers. The casualties on both sides were in the thousands. The goal of Ortona was actually very similar to that of Tobruk in North Africa. The British needed a port closer to the front lines that was a deep water port that could be used for resupply operations on the Adriatic coast. So over the next 8 days between December 20th and December 28th, 1943, the Canadian Army pushed through Ortona, facing fierce resistance in house-to-house fighting. Because of this, the battle would earn the nicknames of Little Stalingrad or Italian Stalingrad after the war. Now, the ways they could do this map, they could do the Moro River around the city where there's more hills and open fields, to give it maybe a slight more tan vibe, or Hill 400 but with less trees and just more bushes. At least that's how I viewed it, at least looking at the map. Or they could do Ortona itself, where it's just a all-city battle that essentially makes Stalingrad look like an open map in comparison. Mostly feeling like Carentan in the sense of how I think this map could be built if it's a city-only map. But the way I looked at this map is it would at least get Italy in the war, and it would move the battlefield to an area we haven't seen yet. So that's my thoughts on the matter. Now that the British faction has 2 map suggestions, let's pop over to the Eastern Front and give the Russians 2 map suggestions. Starting with the most obvious one, Berlin, or the area around Berlin. This one is a no-brainer. This is one that I've seen numerous times in the comments section, and it's a lot like Tobruk in how a lot of people have been asking for it. You had a lot of different things going on in Berlin. Over 3 million soldiers across all the armies involved, majority Soviet of course, attacking Berlin to take it over and bring Nazi Germany's rule to an end. And you had some of Russia's best commanders in this battle. Grigori Zhukov, Konstantin Rokossovsky, Ian Kovev, and just in general it was a bloody battle with losses totaling in the millions. Now, part of the reason why I think that they probably haven't made a Berlin map is most likely because of Stalingrad being a laggy instability nightmare, because a all-city map is a bit more taxing on the game itself, which might correlate to why they haven't done it, but I don't know. I'm not a dev. I don't know what all goes into it. That's just my theory. I could be completely wrong. But if that was the case, there is another part of the map that I would consider Berlin that I myself would at least be happy with, and that would be Seelow Heights. Seelow Heights essentially was the build-up to the Battle of Berlin, where the 1st Belarusian Front attacked the German 9th Army for control of the area to essentially attack Berlin from the center. This would be an area with a little bit of rolling hills, but more open, that would be maybe less taxing on the game if, say, a Berlin map was truly untenable for the game. Now, even though the Battle for Seelow Heights was nowhere near as deadly as the Battle of Berlin, I think it would be a worthwhile substitute for a late war Eastern Front map that you could put a sub-faction in for the Soviets and potentially for the Germans, depending on how you want to do it, to add new weapons and tanks to the game with different features. That would make the game a little bit more interesting and give us another Eastern Front map that takes place during the fall of Germany. For this next one, this one will be a city map or bust in my opinion, but we're going to go with it. Now, for this next one though, there was no game that I could think of that was a shooter that would allow me to actually show off this map, so I just decided to put Carentan on for it. But it would be the Battle of Budapest in 1944. So during the latter half of 1944, the Soviet military launched the Operation Bagration, which essentially would collapse Army Group Center and surround Army Group North, forcing the entirety of the front line to basically collapse. As Operation Bagration was happening, the Soviets did try to push through the Carpathian Mountains and into Romania. In doing so, they got the Romanians and the Bulgarians to essentially switch sides and fight against the Germans. The Hungarians tried to do something similar, but the Germans were able to occupy Hungary, essentially, and keep them fighting under their own banner. The siege of Budapest would last from December 29th, 1944 to February 13th, 1945, meaning that you could also put a sub-faction in for this nation, or the same one you would that I was mentioning for the Berlin map, as there'd be other things like IS-2s, T-34-85s, and just other weapons that could be used in the battle. But this was a all-urban battle for the city, and that'd be the only way I could see that being a thing for the siege of Budapest, not doing any outside the city or anything like that. Now, to my knowledge, there is no World War II shooter game that has the siege of Budapest, let alone any real battle in that area of Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Greece, whatever. As far as I know anyway. But it'd be one thing to finally have that theater as well, and it would be different from France, from Belgium, Italy, North Africa. It would be a whole new country to fight the war in. This fifth and final one does kind of go headlong into what I was saying about factions in general, but I figured once Team 17 can hopefully fix some of their issues and add some new maps to the other factions like I've mentioned before with my ideas, they could maybe add this next map as maybe a standoff to add another faction, the Japanese. The map in question is Guadalcanal. Now, you may be asking, oh, if we're going to do the Pacific campaign, can we do Iwo Jima or Okinawa or anything like that? Well, the problem with that is Japanese small arms and tanks just don't stand up to American small arms at that stage in the war. Arisakas, Type 100s, Type 99s, whatever, cannot stand up to M1 Garands, Thompsons, BARs, and just the wide array of weapons that the Americans had. On top of that, Japanese tanks were notoriously bad against Allied armor, to the point where even M5, M3 Stuarts were able to effectively counter Japanese armor, let alone the Shermans that eventually saw combat in the Pacific. Now, the reason I'm picking Guadalcanal is essentially for its background, which I'll talk about right now. So Guadalcanal was essentially the start of the island hopping campaign that the Allies would go through to start taking islands and cut the route off to Japan slowly but surely. And Guadalcanal was the center of that. It was the first major island that the United States was trying to attack to essentially slow down the progress of the Japanese heading toward Australia. Now, the U.S. Marines that took part in this operation to take Guadalcanal were still using old World War I weapons like the M1903 bolt-action rifle, which by the U.S. standards was actually outdated. With the M1 Garand being available since 1936, the U.S. Marines stuck to it because of stubborn traditionalism and the fears that the M1 Garand was not reliable. Irregardless, though, the U.S. Marines did have a couple M1 Garands for some of their support units, but it was not in very large numbers. Now, I'm stressing heavily on the semi-automatic thing because having this against a foe that has only bolt-action rifles as their main battle rifles is huge. You can fire off rounds way more effectively with the same damage numbers, essentially, at least from a game perspective. And that makes a lot of difference when fighting, and that's why I don't want to see a Okinawa or Iwo Jima, because all the American troops have M1 Garands. In Guadalcanal, they didn't have it, which would make for a more balanced battle overall, and the Allies here would only have a handful of light tanks, which would be about the same as the Japanese had, which would at least be on par, or at least could be on par if the game was developed accordingly. Now, once the British and Russians finally get rounded out, I wouldn't mind seeing a Japanese faction on a map like Guadalcanal. That way it's historically accurate, it's a new battlefield, and I think everyone will get what they want. Now, my last little disclaimer here is I know I am leaving a lot of different maps on the table, so that's why I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say, and curious about my ideas and if they are good maps to be played in the game. So leave that down in the comments section below, but we're going to try and get back to some guide videos, such as more myth-busting videos, and get ready for the holiday season. Hope you got something out of this one. Take care. Have a good rest of your day. See you in the next one.